The Pro Wrestle Machine is back. Welcome to the show.
Make sure to like and subscribe, it helps the algorithm. Now to the next issue, which is April 7, 1997 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. Bill Miller passes away. Full bio.
EFC MMA pay-per-view recap.
Kingdom debuts in Japan. More. By Observer staff. Dr. Bill Miller, the famed pro wrestling veterinarian who was one of the most successful masked wrestlers of all time, passed away on March 24 from an apparent heart attack at the age of 69. Miller was a major name in pro wrestling during the 50s and 60s. He was known as one of the monsters of his era, as he was one of the largest men in the profession, but also one of the best all-round athletes. He held a few versions of the world title and was remembered by many as a unique wrestler who spent most of his time before and after the matches studying rather than drinking and chasing women, ending up with a life after wrestling as a successful vet working for the state of Ohio. He was a heck of a guy, remembered Lou Thez, who wrestled Miller on numerous occasions for the NWA title. When a lot of the guys were out boozing and chasing the broads, he was hitting the books.
He was a big guy who could move and was very colorful.
A great performer. We had a lot of good matches. He was a very competitive guy and commanded a lot of respect in the dressing room. He always had a book in his hand when the rest of us had a beer, joked Red Bastian.
Miller, who had been in poor health with back problems and circulatory problems that had caused him to lose nearly 5 inches in height in recent years, was coming out of a local gym in his hometown of Reynoldsburg, Ohio, and in the parking lot collapsed from an apparent heart attack. Miller was one of the top all-around athletes in wrestling of his era. At 6'4" and 250 pounds, which were monstrous proportions for athletes of that era, he earned 9 varsity letters, 3 each in wrestling, track, shot put and discus, and football while attending Ohio State University from 1948 to 51. As a senior, he was a national-level caliber competitor in all 3 sports. He was a top football star as an offensive lineman. He went to the Nationals in the shot put. And as a wrestler, he was named Most Outstanding Wrestler in the Big Ten meet and placed 4th as a heavyweight in the NCAA tournament. He was first taught his wrestling as a teenager in the Navy during the tail end of World War II. His success at Ohio State led to him being recruited by Al Haft, the famous promoter of that era out of Columbus, Ohio, and he was given an immediate push due to his size and legit athletic ability. As a rookie in 1952, he won a version of the World Heavyweight title recognized in several northern states from Don Eagle in Pittsburgh, before losing to crown to his longtime rival Buddy Rogers later that year. He also traded the Eastern States and Midwestern States belts with Rogers on the Ohio circuit during the early 50s. I think if Bill was around today in the Ultimate Fight competitions, he'd be the hooker and those guys would be the hookies, Bastian said, noting Miller had not only the size and the wrestling background but also the submission background for years of being Carl Gotch's best friend in wrestling and main training partner. Although Miller was noted as a tough guy, he was straight-laced, stable and apparently never a problem in or out of the ring. He was particularly popular with Sam Mushnick in St. Louis, who used him through 1975, when he called it quits for good at the age of 48, generally in the top portion of his usually loaded shows. By the 70s, Miller was a wrestler who was kept strong but largely was there to put newer guys getting a major push over. Beating Miller in St. Louis was a sign to the fans that the wrestler was about to get a world title shot. He was a class act, head and shoulders above 99% of the guys in the profession, remembered Larry Maduzik, who was Mushnick's assistant and the television announcer in St. Louis during that time period. We worked him in main events all the time. He lost almost all of them. Sam liked to use Bill because he was totally reliable, and when it came to putting people over, there were never any ego problems with Bill. Evidence of that was in Miller's final Madison Square Garden match against Bruno Sammartino on August 23, 1965. Miller put Sammartino over clean, as everyone did in those days, but did so in just 48 seconds. But Miller's most fame in pro wrestling probably came as a masked wrestler, Mr. M in the Midwest. The masked monstrous Mr. M, billed at 6'6" or 6'7" and over 300 pounds, he probably legitimately weighed in the 280 to 285 pound range by this time and wore a size 54 jacket. With both speed and wrestling skill, arrived in the Omaha circuit in 1958 and plowed through the competition with the boast that he would unmask if anyone could beat him. He was put over and soon became one of the biggest names in the wrestling magazines and the mysterious monster that week after week would beat all the major names in Omaha and who became one of the best drawing heels of the era. The question of who was the man under the mask was one of the big stories worldwide in wrestling during that time period, which grew bigger as time wore on and he continued to win all his matches. Eventually Mr. M captured the version of the world title recognized in Omaha from Wilbur Snyder in August of 1959, and it wasn't until February of 1961 when he finally was beaten by the equally large Don Leo Jonathan. He continued to feud with Jonathan for the next several months, including regaining and losing back the title. Mr. M then became Mr. X and went to Japan for the third annual World League, an annual singles tournament that evolved into today's Champion Carnival. On May 1, 1961, he pinned rookie Shohei Baba, a notable match in that it was considered the first major match of Baba's career. This led to his first challenge for Rikidozan's international title, which ended in a double countout on May 23, 1961 in Osaka. Mr. X went all the way to the finals of the tournament on June 29, 1961 in Osaka, where he was disqualified in the third fall against Rikidozan. This led to the blow-off, where Mr. X put his mask on the line in a match where there had to be a winner against Rikidozan's international title on July 21, 1961 at the Tokyo Denon Coliseum, which Rikidozan won in 2 straight falls, and Mr. X unmasked. His size made him a natural heel for that era, but because he had the clean-cut looks of a babyface in that era combined with his well-known athletic background, it was the mask and mystery that led to his most famous run, and one of the reasons promoters liked it was because he was always willing to unmask when the time was right, and his name was well known enough that when he did unmask, it wasn't a letdown to the fans when the identity of the man dominating the promotion was revealed. His success in Omaha with the gimmick prompted Vern Gagne to bring Miller into Minneapolis in late 1961, where they largely repeated the exact same successful promotional formula. Mr. M wound up as the first masked wrestler to win what would be considered one of the major versions of an American world title when he captured the AWA belt from Gagne on January 9, 1962 in Minneapolis and held it until August 21, 1962 when he lost it back to Gagne in Minneapolis, forcing him to unmask. After getting his degree in veterinary medicine, he became known as Dr. Big Bill Miller and was one of the top heels in the country for the next several years, including being a major contender for Bruno Sammartino's WWF title for most of 1965. He also had a famous Texas death match with Ray Stevens at the Cow Palace in San Francisco for the U.S. title when Stevens had just turned babyface. During his career he also worked as part of the Miller Brothers tag team, both with Ed, not a real brother, and Danny, a real brother who became a booker in Florida. The two were later estranged. The Millers were known in the late 50s as Scientific Villains, having won the Canadian Open Tag Team titles in 1957, and then debuting in Madison Square Garden on September 13, 1958 against Larry, Missouri Mauler, and Joe, Assassin No. 2, Hamilton. Although Miller was respected by everyone in the business due to his size and background, he wasn't known as a man who got into fights, yet he's probably as famous within the profession for 2 out-of-the-ring escapades. In 1962, when Rogers was the NWA champion, there was a dressing room confrontation between Rogers, who was considered the top drawing card and best all-around performer in the game but by no means considered one of the toughest men in the game, and Gotch, who was considered perhaps the toughest and most skilled wrestler although he wasn't a great drawing card, with Miller involved as well. Rogers was also one of the major power brokers in the game at that point, booking many of the biggest names for Al Haft, among the game's most powerful promoters who controlled a lot of the top talent. Gotch was mad at the manner he'd been booked, believing Rogers was starving him out, and was ready to cause a real scene. There was a famous dressing room confrontation involving Gotch, Miller and Rogers which wound up with Rogers suffering a broken arm, which was a huge story because the touring NWA champion and the biggest drawing card in the game at the time had to sit out several months. It was an even bigger story behind the scenes since at the time this happened, the NWA promoters were trying to get the title off Rogers, and had brought Luthez out of semi-retirement by promising him the belt, while the Northeastern promoters, mainly Vince McMahon Sr. and Toots Mott, were trying to steal control of Rogers to work as a full-time regular for their company at the time what later became the WWF, and today's the WWF, was one of the biggest offices of the NWA, without him losing the credibility as being the most recognized world champion in the process. Throughout the years there have been numerous versions of what exactly went down in Ohio that night, but the version Thez believes is that Gotch was about to slap Rogers around. Rogers headed for the door, which Miller was guarding, and as Rogers tried to escape, Miller was slamming the door to keep him from doing so, and the arm was in the door. Japan has its own version of a similar story involving Gotch, Miller, and a famous strongman wrestler of the time known as the Great Antonio. Antonio was apparently causing some major problems in Japan, bullying people around and getting the big head, particularly after his title match against Rikidozan on live television on June 2, 1961 drew a 69.7 rating, which likely made it the single most watched wrestling match in history up to that point. Obviously somebody with that kind of interest and drawing power must have done things awful to have the promotion send the policeman, so to speak, after him. and apparently Gotch and Miller did a number on him as punishment. There was also a story about a match in Pittsburgh involving Miller and Sammartino which got out of control and actually turned into a shoot, although exactly what happened at that point depends on the point of reference of the person telling the story. By the late 60s, Miller had a full-time job with the state of Ohio as a vet but continued to wrestle in the area and occasionally would hit major arenas for weekend fly-ins. It was fortunate he got the job because of the state medical benefits since he'd had so many health problems in recent years. He was originally from Fremont, Ohio, but was billed from Columbus, Ohio during his entire career due to his Ohio State background and because Haft, based in Columbus, got his wrestling career started. It wasn't until 1968 that Miller returned to Japan, largely because of what may have been the biggest head-to-head television ratings battle up to that time in wrestling history. On January 3, 1968, a new promotion called the Trans World Wrestling Association, bringing in Lou Thesz and Danny Hodge as their top stars, went on Japan's TBS Channel 6 in Tokyo, in a live head-to-head television battle against NTV's Japanese Wrestling Association. Miller was a semi-finalist on the Tokyo show, teaming with Ricky Hunter to challenge Kentaro Oki and Michiaki Yoshimura for the vacant All-Asian Tag Team titles in a match which ended in a double count-out, underneath the Baba vs. the Crusher main event for the international title. TWWA headlined with Thesz retaining his version of the World Heavyweight title, beating Great Kusatsu. NTV won the ratings battle, drawing a 48 rating to the 28 rating drawn by TWWA, but the combined audience was without a doubt the largest audience ever to watch pro wrestling at any time in Japan, or perhaps any other country as well. Oki and Yoshimura ended up beating Miller and Hunter to capture the titles 3 days later in Osaka. Miller and Crusher were then scheduled to face Baba and Antonio Inoki on January 8 for the international tag team titles in Hiroshima. However, Inoki never arrived due to a snowstorm at the airport, and under the Japanese rules for missing the title match, the belts were declared vacant. Baba teamed with Yoshimura in the title match, which wound up with the belts held up after a double count out. This led to a February 3, 1968 match in Tokyo, where Baba and Inoki beat Crusher and Miller when Inoki used the abdominal stretch to make Miller submit in the third fall. In 1970, he reprised his most famous role as the monstrous masked man, this time known as the Crimson Knight, for Mushnick in St. Louis. He had an 11-month build, with the gimmick being he was a well-known national star that the big names avoided, going unbeaten with the stipulation that he would unmask if anyone could beat him. Miller had been a headliner on and off in St. Louis for years, working with the likes of Thesz, Fritz von Erich, Dick the Bruiser, Wilbur Snyder, and Johnny Valentine. After beating Jack Briscoe, this led to the biggest match of the year in St. Louis, moved from the regular Kiel Auditorium to the Checkerdome on November 20, 1970, in a match which it was guaranteed the mystery would come to an end. The Crimson Knight challenged NWA champion Dory Funk Jr., and the stipulation was that after the match, win or lose, he'd unmask, since if he lost, he had agreed to unmask, and if he won, Mushnick had declared the NWA couldn't have a masked world champion. Naturally, Funk Jr. won the match, and the Knight unmasked before 14,000 fans. Mushnick kept Miller around for 5 more years after that point, usually as a heel, working semifinals. His last major championship run was in 1971 for the old International Wrestling Enterprises in Japan, where he beat Thunder Sugiyama for that company's World Heavyweight, later renamed as International title when this group recognized Verne Gagne's AWA title as its world title, as it became the AWA's Japanese affiliate title on March 4, 1971 in Kokura. Miller dropped the title, at this point called International, supposedly on June 19, 1971 in Duluth, Minnesota, to Shozo Kobayashi, that the company was built around for the next few years, in a match that supposedly went 58 minutes, although that was probably a fictitious match. Vanessa Williams sang a song a few years back about saving the best for last. While a love song would probably be the single most inappropriate analogy for something as flicky and combative as the Extreme Fighting Championships, that's also probably the best description of what more likely than not is the group's farewell. Plagued by economic problems, the inability to make the group popular enough to turn a profit, combined with political problems of more and more cable systems deciding to no longer carry NHB shows, the odds are great the final chapter of Extreme Fighting in this form was played out on March 28 in Des Moines, Iowa, before a sparse crowd of only 750 fans in the 11,000-seat Veterans Memorial Auditorium. More importantly, the buy rate for the show, based on preliminary estimates, was in the range of 0.12 for an estimated $172,000 company gross, and since putting on even a bare-bones show is going to cost $300,000 to $400,000, you can see the turnaround in buy rate needed to save the promotion didn't come close. The reality is that the buy rate declined, despite it coming on the heels of a very strong EFC3. Just 2 days before the show, Time Warner Cable apparently followed in the path of Cablevision and TCI in deciding to no longer carry NHB shows. Apparently being the operative word, since UFC officials have no indication that Time Warner won't be carrying their May 30th show at press time. The Time Warner decision was not a national one, as there were many systems that carried the EFC largely due to the fact so much advertising had already been out. But other Time Warner systems, mainly in the Southeast region but also in Cincinnati and other spots around the country, decided even though Barker channel ads for the show ran up until fight time, to pull the plug on carrying the event literally at the last minute. TCI had already decided this would be the last NHB show it would carry. EFC follows in the wake of UWFI, a work shooting group from Japan, and Pancrase, in the same basic pattern ending up in oblivion. All three groups opened with good showings, surprisingly good in the case of the latter two. EFC's first showing of about an 0.3 buy rate wasn't surprising in that there was a ton of national media publicity surrounding the show because of a last-minute move from New York City to North Carolina. But in all cases, the numbers dwindled for each successive show, in all cases, as the product improved. And EFC followed in the footsteps of UWFI and Pancrase in that by the time they presented their best show, it was apparently too late. The show was built around the NHB debuts of Olympic gold medalist wrestlers Kevin Jackson and Kenny Monday, which garnered a short item in USA Today. Both were guaranteed $25,000 for the appearance. EFC had all the problems of a low-rent third-rate pay-per-view production. Bad announcing, including play-by-play man Dave Bontempo, who is apparently a good boxing announcer, but on this show couldn't even get the names of the fighters right, and a stripper type doing locker room interviews with a bad case of a collagen injection gone awry. Actually, as out of place as she was, she still got better interviews than a lot of others in the same situation on similar shows were able to do. Constant mic problems for guest analysts who ranged from having a hard time with the language, Russian Igor Zinoviev, to just being a bad idea in this day and time to be out there, and former pro wrestling announcer Judo Jinla Bell. Bontempo constantly mixed up Kevin Jackson and Kenny Monday's names and once called Pat Miletic a Muay Thai, instead of Muay Thai champion, which I guess means he can drink people under the table. Dressing room reporter Gretchen Van Durant went into the dressing room for an airheaded dressing room interview that made her seem like a shoot-fighting version of Missy Hyatt, and said "Hi Pat" to an embarrassed Paul Jones. Bad ring entrances, classically awful ring announcing, and no crowd in a darkened arena. And one of the worst pregame shows ever, in which the card was never announced, and in which, 10 minutes before the show went on the air, the announcer simply said goodbye, and the final 10 minutes of what should be the hard sell simply had no vocals and a shot of a darkened empty arena with a circular cage battlefield and a clock ticking off for time remaining before the show started. And then there was a power failure in the building before the first pay-per-view match started. Since they had taped an earlier match in the event, the scheduled matches all were short. They plugged it in during the power failure. But it was a poor match which saw both fighters avoid locking up, and after the first round aired, which Booker John Peretti, calling the match solo, admitted how boring it was, they went back to live action for the scheduled card and said the first match was a boring 3-round draw. And then there were the rest of the fights. You can't say enough for the job Peretti did in arranging the fights. Sometimes when two good fighters are put in with one another, the result is a boring stalemate. But that was never a problem on this show. With the exception of the one match taped ahead of time which was put together in the last few days, every match was interesting, and all for different reasons. You had the quick submission finish. You had the time limit draw in a very competitive match which featured the most unique suplex ever on an NHB show. You had the doctor stopping a competitive match for a controversial reason. You had the best pure wrestling ever on NHB shows. You had several back and forth competitive matches where you couldn't instantly tell in the first 20 seconds who was going to win. And you had the single most devastating knockout ever in an American NHB event. All in all, while the show didn't have the advantage the natural drama a show-long tournament brings to UFCs, the quality of the show from a match-by-match basis in terms of match quality and fighter quality was the best of any NHB show yet in the United States. During the entire show, there was no mention as to the status of Ralph Gracie, who was in all the advertising as fighting. Supposedly his opponent Eugenio Tato couldn't get in the country due to visa problems, but a lot of people are skeptical since it was well known Gracie didn't want to fight him under the round rules. Sources close to Tato were saying Tato was told not to come in because Gracie had pulled out of the fight, claiming he didn't want to fight since his father couldn't get into the US because of visa problems. Igor Zinoviev advertised as fighting on the show, although he was there as a color commentator, with no mention being made of the shoulder surgery that was done months ago. Well, long enough back that there should have been no mix-up when it comes to advertising his name as fighting, kept him off the show, nor of the political problems that are a grave danger to not only this group but to the genre. One of the reasons the fan base of this genre hasn't reacted to the problems facing its future is because for the most part they are kept in the dark about them because NHB gets no media coverage except in cable trade publications or stories on the exaggerated brutality issue. They did announce a July 11th pay-per-view date, but that's highly questionable for a number of reasons, not the least of which is economic but also because UFC has a July 23rd date and it's doubtful the few companies left that will carry the events will carry two events that close together. The major plus in comparison to UFC shows, aside from the fact there were no fighters on the show that appeared not to belong and the overall skill level was superior to most UFC shows, was they did some very good introductory pieces on all the fighters. They went to all of their hometowns and showed them training and they answered questions in pieces that were well put together. You had a sense of who the fighters were, why they were there and what they were going to be good at, before they ever stepped into the cage. Gary Myers, 3-2-1, went to a 3-round draw with Tom Glanville, 0-1-1. This was a rematch from EFC 1, which Myers won easily. For some reason Myers, a former NIA All-American wrestler, never shot in on Glanville, who he took down with ease in their previous match. These guys were both added to the card within the last week when the Ralph Gracie match fell apart and both appeared to fight in the style Shamrock and Severn made infamous in Detroit. The first round, All Dancing, aired on television. I was told the next two rounds, which were said to have been even worse than the first, were also dancing and with no judges. It was ruled a draw. Myers has worked a few shows as an indie pro wrestler in Indiana years back. 1. Alan Goes 2-0 beat Todd Bjornathan 1-1 in 47. Goes is a Brazilian jiu-jitsu star who had a famous draw in a 1985 Pancrase match against Frank Shamrock. Bjornathan is a Matt Hume student from the Pancratian promotion who also did Pancrase matches a few years back. Bjornathan surprisingly knocked Goes down at the bell, and as he went to pounce on him, Goes caught his head in a triangle choke with his legs and also grabbed an armbar at the same time. A brilliantly executed finish from the bottom. 2. Eric Paulson, 1-2-1, went to a draw with Paul Jones after 3 rounds. Paulson is light heavyweight champion for Satoru Sayama's shooting promotion in Japan, while Jones, a former NCAA Division II All-American wrestler, second place at 177 pounds in both 1985 and 1986 for University of Nebraska Omaha, is the top heavyweight for Steve Nelson's USWF in Amarillo. This was a very good match in that Jones had the advantage from a positioning standpoint and threw 2 great suplexes, but Paulson actually came closer to winning with submissions from the bottom. In the first round, Jones got the takedown using a back suplex and maintained the top position but did little with it. Jones had a bloody mouth by the end of the round. In the second round, Jones ended up on top again but Paulson nearly got a submission with a side triangle. Jones threw lots of punches from the top but most never landed. In the third round, Paulson tried to box early but Jones again got the takedown. Paulson again went for arm, ankle and knee submissions but Jones's superior power was able to stave off the submission. Just as the match was about to end, Jones squatted Paulson off the mat into airplane spin position, and then basically jumped forward with him doing a move that Dan Crawford used to use in All Japan for a unique suplex. Actually, after the landing, Paulson seemed to be working again for a submission as the match ended. Since they didn't have judges, this was a draw. Had they had judges, this would have been the most difficult time limit match in US NHB history to call a winner since Jones had more advantage time and threw the hot moves but Paulson came closer to executing potential finishing moves. I'd have actually gone for Paulson if I had to pick. 3. Kevin Jackson beat John LeBay, 4-1-1. Jackson, who looked nothing short of incredible, was the 1992 Olympic gold medalist at 181 pounds in freestyle wrestling. He's still active in freestyle wrestling, and competes this coming week in the World Cup for the US at 187 pounds. After the match they strongly hinted that Jackson would get a crack at Zinoviev's under 200-pound championship on the next show, which would be a sensational match if it actually can be put together. LeBay, who won one of the IFC heavyweight tournaments, has a time limit draw with Zinoviev and a 30 minutes decision win over Frank Shamrock in his 2 most recent fights, was hardly a pushover for Jackson's debut. But Jackson's wrestling skill overwhelmed LeBay, who he took down and dominated on the ground with punches and knees, including some great punches at the end of the round. LeBay's face was pretty bloody by the end of the round, but when he was checked, it was decided he could continue. In the second round, Jackson took LeBay down again and used punches to soften him up for a head and arm choke submission at 112. 5. Matt Hume 2-0 beat Pat Militic 15-1. Hume is the head of AMC Pancratian and has also done Pancrase in the past. Militic, from nearby Bettendorf, Iowa, is the top fighter for the local Iowa-based shoot fighting group called Extreme Challenge. Militic managed to get the top position but didn't do any serious damage. Hume escaped, and used his superior standing skills to get a lot of good blows in, including a few knees to the face, one of which broke Militic's nose. After the first round, Dr. Joseph Estwainick stopped the fight when he felt the nose and found it broken. There was a lot of controversy about this, including from John Peretti, who said his own nose had been broken numerous times in kickboxing matches that were never stopped. Estwainick basically said that times have changed and now fights are stopped for broken noses. The local commissioner was also upset because they routinely let boxing events continue with competitors breaking their nose, but boxing isn't in the same political hot water as this sport. 6. Kenny Monday beat John Lewis, 1-1-3, to win the newly created under 180-pound welterweight title. Monday was the 1988 Olympic gold medalist at 163 pounds and has been at or near the top of the U.S. rankings ever since, including competing in the 1996 Games. Lewis is an experienced fighter in this genre. Monday took Lewis down early and was throwing punches, but Lewis caught the arm extended and went for an armbar twice. One, he had the arm so severely bent it looked as if it would snap, but in reality it didn't even do serious damage since Monday used the arm the rest of the fight. By the end of the round, Lewis was bleeding from the eye and mouth. Monday got on top at the beginning of the second round and landed a lot of good punches while in the guard. Finally, Monday broke the guard and landed 7 or 8 solid punches in a row before the referee stopped the match in 4:09 of the round. Lewis suffered a concussion but was released from the hospital later that evening. 7. Maurice Smith 2-0 beat Murakami Kazunari, 1-1, to retain the EFC heavyweight title. Kazunari looked to be an easy opponent for Smith, since his title shot was earned with a win over an aged Bart Valley. Smith, 35. Besides having a lengthy still active kickboxing career and still holds a minor version of the world heavyweight title in that sport, has had a long affiliation with pro wrestling, having done mixed matches for the old UWF and PWFG, worked as a pro wrestler for Pancrase, and currently works for Rings, where in January he did a job for Akira Maeda. Frank Shamrock was Smith's second for this match. Kazunari shocked Smith at the bell, rushing him and decking him with a punch, and followed it with several more punches before Smith kind of woke up and realized he was in a fight. Smith regained his bearings and reversed Kazunari on the ground and threw heavy body punches while in his guard. Once Kazunari released the guard, Smith got up to his feet, but Kazunari didn't want to fight him there, so he stayed down. Smith began systematically throwing brutal whipping leg kicks to Kazunari as he laid there until finally Kazunari got up. By this time his legs were gone and he was a sitting duck, and Smith moved to set up a punch, and at 4:20 threw the most devastatingly effective punch in American NHB history for the knockout. Kazunari was out immediately and remained out for 10 minutes. He was the first person in American NHB history to have to be helped out of the ring and suffered a concussion, although he was released from the hospital and joking around later that night. Both in the pre-taped feature and after the match, Smith challenged Royce Gracie, noting that Gracie had challenged him in the past, before Smith knew the ground game, and Smith said for Royce not to let rules and money stand in the way. A new Japanese promotion which will basically be a reformation of the old UWFI, but apparently with a style change to being worked UFC-style matches, called Kingdom, will be debuting with a show on May 4th. Takeshi Ken Suzuki, the longtime business manager of Nobuhiko Takada, announced the new promotion, which had been rumored for several weeks and reported on in the past both in Japanese newspapers and here, in a press conference on March 30th in Tokyo. They announced that unlike UWFI, which Suzuki basically ran from a business standpoint, although it was Takada's name as president, and went out of business at the end of 1996, that Takada would not have an executive or behind-the-scenes role in the new group, although he would remain the group's top star. The first show will be May 4th in Tokyo at the Yoyogi Gym. The matches will differ from the traditional UWF style that was popularized in a big way in Japan in 1988-90 and largely continues in Rings. This group will allow punches to the face and allow fighters to wear gloves, and also allow both punching and using elbows down from the mount position on the ground. The only difference between the rules of this and UFC rules are banning of blows to the base of the spine. In initial reports regarding the formation of this promotion, the belief was that it was largely being done to set up for a Tokyo Dome match later this year with Takada vs. Rickson Gracie, although nothing of the sort was even hinted about in the press conference. Besides Takada, other former UWFI wrestlers signed with the group are Yoji Anjo, Yoshihiro Takayama, Yuhi Sano, Masahito Kakihara, Kazushi Sakuraba, Hiromitsu Kanehara, Kenichi Yamamoto, Ryuki Kamiyamato, and Shunsuke Matsui. With the exception of Takayama, who worked for All Japan at Budokan on March 1st, and Sano, who worked the All Japan show in Nagoya on March 30th, All the aforementioned wrestlers have been inactive this year after UWFI closed up shop in December. Enjo, Takayama and Yamamoto worked numerous indie shows in 1996 for a number of promotions as the Golden Cups. Apparently the group was put together by Enjo's older brother who got the money together, largely through major financing from Nishin Kensetsu, a real estate development company. Results. March 16, Caguas, Puerto Rico, WWC, American Lightweight title, Chuck Singer beat Pablo Marquez to win title, Ray Gonzalez to Huracan Castillo, Abdullah the Butcher beat Ram Man DQ, Invader No. 1 beat Chicky Star DQ, Universal title Carlos Colon beat Jim Steele DQ. March 18, Pachuca, AAA, Xochitl Hamada and Lady Metal beat Zauri and Love, Mini Vader and Mini Psychosis and Mini Pentagon beat Mascarada Sagrada Jr. and Octagon Cheeto, not original, and Mini Cibernetico, Pero Aguayo Jr. and Mascara Sagrada and Super Muñeco beat Los Payasos DQ. Mexican Light Heavyweight title Latin Lover beat La Calaca DQ, Pero Aguayo and Cibernetico beat Razor Ramon and Diesel DQ. March 21, Minneapolis, WCW, 8948, Public Enemy beat Faces of Ear, Conan beat La Parka, Rey Mysterio Jr. beat Super Calo, US title, Dean Malenko beat Chris Jericho, Chris Benoit beat Kevin Sullivan DQ, WCW tag titles Lex Luger and the Giant beat Kevin Nash and 6 DQ, Diamond Dallas Page beat Randy Savage. March 22, Durango, AAA, Mini Mankind and Mini Goldust beat Mini Cibernetico and La Parquita, Luxor and Discovery and Supernova and Venom beat Maniaco and Frank Nitti and Goyo and Al Capone, La Calaca and Crazy 33 and Jerry Estrada beat Latin Lover and Heavy Metal and Hector Garza, Razor Ramon and Diesel and Pentagon beat Octagon and Connect and Cibernetico DQ. March 25, Peoria, Illinois, WWF Monday Night Raw / Shotgun Tapings, 4282, European title Davey Boy Smith, Ancio and Hart 3¼ stars, Mosco de la Merced beat Supernova 1 star, Jesse James beat Jeff Fox, Savio Vega and Crush beat Rob Bell and Adam O'Brien, Goldust beat Hunter Hearst Helmsley DQ 2 stars, IC title, Rocky Maivia beat Bret Hart DQ 3 stars, Doug Furness and Phil LaFon beat Luxor and Supernova and Discovery and Venom beat Abismo Negro and Mosco de la Merced and Maniaco and Hysteria, Mankind beat Bob Holly, Sid beat Jeff Fox, WWF tag titles Road Warriors beat Hart and Smith DQ. March 25, Wakayama FMW, Flying Kid Ichihara beat Hideo Makimura, Miwasato beat Yoko Ikeda, Dragon Winger and Haido beat Mr. Pogo 2 and Hayato Nanjo, Street Fight Miss Mongol and Crusher Maidamari and Shark Tsuchiya beat Ri and Kaori Nakayama and Megumi Kudo, Headhunters beat Wing Kanemura and Hideki Hasaka, Super Leather and the Gladiator beat Riki Fuji and Hayabusa, Katsutoshi Niyama and Mr. Ganasuke and Hisakatsu Oya beat Masato Tanaka and Tetsuhiro Kuroda and Koji Nakagawa. March 25, Namioka, Michinoku Pro, 325 sellout, Vampiro Canadiense beat Grand Naniwa, Masato Yakashiji and Pantera beat Tarako and Super Delphin, Jinsei Shinzaki beat Shoichi Funaki, Dick Togo and Hanzo Nakajima and Taka Michinoku beat Great Sasuke and Gran Hamada and Naohiro Hoshikawa. March 26, Fukui, All Japan, 2400, Tsuyoshi Kikuchi beat Kentaro Shiga, Mighty Inoue and Masa Fuchi and Haruka Eigen beat Giant Baba and Rusher Kimura and Mitsuo Momota, Johnny Ace beat Tamon Honda, Masao Inoue and Yoshinari Ogawa and Toshiaki Kawada beat Manu Kiyomossman and Tornado and Johnny Smith, Giant Kimala 2 beat Jun Akiyama, Akira Tao beat Steve Williams, Mitsuharu Misawa and Kenta Kobashi and Satoru Asako beat Stan Hansen and Gary Albright and Takawa Mori. March 26, Nanato, Michinoku Pro, 184, Masato Yakashiji beat Naohiro Hoshikawa, Pantera beat Tarako, Hanzo Nakajima and Dick Togo beat Grand Naniwa and Super Delphin, Jinsei Shinzaki beat Vampiro Canadiense, Great Sasuke and Gran Hamada beat Shoichi Funaki and Taka Michinoku. March 26, Nimiya, FMW, Hideki Hasaka beat Mamoru Okamoto, Haido beat Hideo Makimura, Super Leather and Katsutoshi Niyama beat Dragon Winger and Wing Kanemura, Shark Tsuchiya and Crusher Maidamari and Miss Mongol and Miwasato beat Megumi Kudo and Kaori Nakayama and Ri and Yoko Ikeda, Masato Tanaka and Koji Nakagawa and Tetsuhiro Kuroda and Hayato Nanjo beat Hisakatsu Oya and Flying Kid Ishihara and Headhunters, The Gladiator and Mr. Ganasuke beat Riki Fuji and Hayabusa. March 26, Nashville, North American All-Star Wrestling Tournament for not title shot, Chris Michaels beat Billy Briggs, Ben Jordan beat Shane Morton, Scufflin' Hillbilly beat Justin St. John, Farron Fox beat Chad Casey, Doug Gilbert beat Kip Morris, Buddy Landell b. Tommy Rich, Jordan B. Michaels, Hillbilly B. Fox, Gilbert Landell, Jordan B. Hillbilly to win tourney, title Colorado, Kid B. Jordan. March 27th Baltimore, WCW 8068, Scotty Riggs b. Julio Sanchez 1 star, Conan b. La Parka 1 1/2 star, U.S. title, Dean Malenko b. Chris Jericho 3 1/2 stars, Rey Mysterio Jr. b. Super Colo 3 1/4 stars. Deathmatch, Kevin Sullivan b. Chris Benoit 3 stars, Randy Savage b. Diamond Dallas Page 2.5 stars, WCW Tag Titles Kevin Nash and Savage b. Lex Luger and the Giant DQ 1 1/2 star. March 27th Owashi, FMW, Mr. Pogo 2 b. Hideo Makimura, Kaori Nakayama and Yoko Ikeda b. Miss Mongol and Miwa Sato Masato Tanaka b. Hayato Nanjo, Headhunter b. Tetsuhiro Kuroda, Shark Tsuchiya and Crusher Matamari b. Ri and Megumi Kudo, The Gladiator and Mr. Ganasuke and Flying Kid Ichihara b. Hayabusa and Riki Fuji and Koji Nakagawa, Bunkhouse Match Hisakatsu Oya and Super Leather and Headhunter A and Katsutoshi Niyama b. Wing Kanemura and Haido and Hideki Hasaka and Dragon Winger. March 27th Yamaguchi, Big Japan, Aries b. Hideyuki Takahashi, Shunmei Matsuzaki b. Goku, Kishin Kawabata b. Taurus, Yoshihiro Tajiri b. Fantastique, Takashi Ishikawa and Shigeo Okamura b. Kendo Nagasaki and Yosuke Kobayashi, Barbed Wire Board Street Fight Shoji Nakamaki and Seiji Yamakawa b. Satoru Shiga and Yuichi Taniguchi. March 28th Tokyo Bay NK Hall, rings, 6,872 sellout, Minoru Tanaka b. Todor Todorov, Willie Peters b. Chris Hazeman, Tsuyoshi Kosaka b. Bisade Teriel, Yoshihisa Yamamoto b. Hansa Nyman, Akira Maeda b. Kiyoshi Tamura. March 28th Nagaoka, All Japan, 3,200 sellout, Tsuyoshi Kikuchi b. Yoshinobu Kanemaru, Yoshinari Ogawa and Takawa Mori b. Masao Inoue and Tamon Honda, Giant Baba and Rusher Kimura and Mitsuo Momoto b. Mighty Inoue and Haruka Eigen and Masafuchi, Tornado and Gary Albright b. Johnny Smith and Johnny Ace, Toshiaki Kawada and Manukia Mossman b. Kantaro Shiga and Jun Akiyama, Akira Taube Giant Kimala 2, Stan Hansen d. Steve Williams 30 minutes, Kena Kobashi b. Mitsuharu Misawa. March 28th Johnstown, Pennsylvania WCW 4295, La Parka b. Julio Sanchez, Scotty Riggs b. Terry Taylor, Super Colo b. Psychosis, U.S. title, Dean Malenko b. Chris Jericho, WCW Tag Titles Kevin Nash and Conan b. Giant and Lex Luger DQ, Diamond Dallas Page b. Randy Savage. March 28th Niigata, New Japan 836 sellout, Yutaka Yoshi b. Kazuyuki Fujita, Koji Kanemoto b. Black Cat, Osamu Nishimura b. Tatsuhito Takaiwa, Jushin Liger and El Samurai b. Kunyaki Kobayashi and Akira Nagami, Satoshi Kojima and Manabu Nakanishi b. Michiyoshi Ohara and Tatsutoshi Goto, Shiro Koshinaka and Akitoshi Saito b. Shinjiro Otani and Junji Hirata, Shinya Hashimoto and Takashi Iizuka b. Tadao Yasuda and Kensuke Sasaki. March 28th Allentown, Pennsylvania, ECW 1186, Little Guido and Tracy Smothers b. Lost Boys, Axel Rotten b. Spike Dudley, Taz b. Chris Chetty, Chris Condito and Brian Lee b. Pit Bull No. 2 and Balls Mahoney. Dudley's won three-way dance over Eliminators and Gangstas for ECW tag titles, Tommy Dreamer and Beulah McGillicuddy b. Shane Douglas and Francine, ECW title / Sandman Ref Raven b. Stevie Richards. March 28th Tokyo Korakuen Hall, FMW, 2,150 sellout, Hayato Nanjo b. Hideo Makimura, Riki Fuji b. Flying Kid Ichihara, Yoko Ikeda and Ri and Kaori Nakayama b. Miwa Sato and Miss Mongol and Crusher Matamari, Tetsuhiro Kuroda b. Mr. Pogo 2, Bunkhouse Deathmatch, Lioness Ashka and Shark Tsuchiya b. Bison Kimura and Megumi Kudo, Headhunter and Super Leather and the Gladiator b. Dragon Winger, and Hideki Hasaka and Haido and Wing Kanemura, Street Fight Katsutoshi Niyama and Mr. Ganasuke and Hisakatsu Oya b. Hayabusa and Masato Tanaka and Koji Nakagawa. March 28th Sacramento, California, NWC, 370, Navajo Kid b. Johnny Payne DQ, Thug b. Cincinnati Red, Louis Piccoli b. Don Juan, Bobby Bradley and Rob Van Dam b. Haystacks Brothers, Honky Tonk Man b. Virgil DQ, Bam Bam Bigelow b. Jim Neidhart DQ, Deathmatch for NWC title Sabu NC Dan Severn. March 28th Bristol, Rhode Island, Century Wrestling Alliance, 451, Stormtrooper b. Muhammad Hossein, Lou Fabiano, Bob Evans b. Maverick Wild, Billy Pearl, Brian Walsh, b. Smooth Operator, Inferno Kid b. Rick Fuller DQ, Half Nelson b. Tiny the Terrible, Tony Ellis DDQ Dungeon Master, Joel Davis b. Boom Boom Basil, Knuckles Nelson B. Star Warrior, Public Enemy B. Ace Darling and Devon Storm. March 28 Kyoto, Big Japan, Fantastique B. Goku, Seiji Yamakawa B. Aries, Hideyuki Takahashi and Shigeo Okamura B. Yosuke Kobayashi and Taurus, Manny Fernandez, Kishin Kawabata B. Satoru Shiga, Shoji Nakamaki B. Yuichi Taniguchi, Kendo Nagasaki and Yoshihiro Tajiri B. Takashi Ishikawa and Shunmei Matsuzaki. March 28 Yubitsukawa, Michinoku Pro, 218, Tako Michinoku B. Naohiro Hoshikawa, Pantera and Vampiro Kanadiense B. Super Delphin and Grand Naniwa, Jinsei Shinzaki B. Tarako, Dick Togo and Hanzo Nakajima and Shoichi Funaki B. Great Sasuke and Grand Hamada and Masato Yakashiji. March 29 Nagarayama All Japan, 2200, Yoshinari Ogawa and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi B. Yoshinobu Kanemaru and Kentaro Shiga, Giant Baba and Rusher Kimura and Mitsuo Momota B. Mighty Inoue and Haruka Eigen and Masafuchi, Steve Williams and Monokia Mossman B. Masao Inoue and Johnny Ace, Ace B. Takawa Mori, Toshiaki Kawada B. Giant Kimala 2, Akira Tao B. Jun Akiyama, Tamon Honda and Mitsuharu Masawa and Kenta Kobashi B. Gary Albright and Stan Hansen and Tornado. March 29 Uzawa, New Japan, 862 Sellout, Akitoshi Saito B. Kazuyuki Fujita, Tadao Yasuda B. Utaka Yoshi, El Samurai B. Black Cat, Jushin Liger B. Tatsuhito Takaiwa, Shinjiro Otani and Kensuke Sasaki B. Koji Kanemoto and Takashi Izuka, 2 of 3 Falls Michiyoshi Ohara and Akira Nagami and Kunyaki Kobayashi and Tatsutoshi Goto and Shiro Koshinaka B. Satoshi Kojima and Osamu Nishimura and Manabu Nakanishi and Junji Hirata and Shiny Hashimoto. March 29 New Kensington, Pennsylvania, ECW, 850, Louis Piccoli and Chris Chetty B. Tracy Smothers and Little Guido 2 stars, Taz B. Spike Dudley 1 star, Pitbull number 2 B. Balls Mahoney 1 star, ECW title, Raven B. Stevie Richards 2.5 stars, Terry Funk B. Brian Lee Dud, Tommy Dreamer and Beulah McGillicuddy B. Shane Douglas and Francine 3 stars, ECW tag titles, Dudley's B. Gangstas 1 star, Tables and Ladders match Sabu and Rob Van Dam B. Eliminators 3 stars. March 29 Memphis, USWA, 500 Mabel B. Dutch Mantle, Stephen Dunby tag, Bill Dundee Kerbrakis, USWA tag titles, Flash Flanagan and Billy Travis B. Interrogator and Rycon to win titles, Stretcher match, Mike Samples NC Bobby Bolton, King Reginald and Queen Nikki B. Jerry Lawler and Downtown Bruno, USWA title Brian Christopher B. Elijah to win title. March 29 Miyaka, Michinoku Pro, 270, Shoichi Funaki B. Naohiro Hoshikawa, Pantera and Masato Yakashiji B. Tarako and Super Delphin, Jinsei Shinzaki B. Vampiro Kanadiense, Great Sasuke and Grand Hamada and Grand Naniwa B. Dick Togo and Takamichinoku and Hanzo Nakajima. March 29 Tokyo Harumi Dome, Fuyuki Promotions, 1823 Sellout, Miho Wakizawa B. Rumi Sekiguchi, Jaguar Yokota and Emi Motokawa B. Chikako Shiratori and Yuki Lee Shark Tsuchiya B. Ri, Kuli SC Jado and Bulldog KT Geto, B. Wing Kanemura and Haido, Mariko Yoshida B. Mima Shimoda, World Street Fight 6-man titles Hiromichi Fuyuki and Geto and Jado B. Great Kabuki and Masao Orihara and Keisuke Yamada. March 30 Nagoya Aichi Gym, All Japan, 6500 Tsuyoshi Kikuchi B. Kentaro Shiga, Giant Baba and Rusher Kimura and Mitsuo Momota B. Masao Inoue and Mighty Inoue and Haruka Eigen, Steve Williams and Giant Kimala 2 and Monokia Mossman B. Yoshinari Ogawa and Tamon Honda and Takawa Mori, Yui Sano and Masafuchi B. Tornado and Johnny Smith, Stan Hansen B. Johnny Ace, Akira Tao B. Gary Albright, Kenta Kobashi B. Jun Akiyama, Mitsuharu Masawa D. Toshiaki Kawada 30 minutes. March 30 Monaca, Pennsylvania, ECW 1000 Chris Chetty and Spike Dudley B. Tracy Smothers and Little Guido, Balls Mahoney B. Corporal Punishment, Pitbull number 2 B. Brian Lee, Taz B. Rob Van Dam, Sabu B. Louis Piccoli, Raven and Shane Douglas B. Terry Funk and Tommy Dreamer, Dudley's beat Eliminators and Gangstas in 3-way dance for ECW tag titles. March 30 Akita, Michinoku Pro, 534, Pantera B. Tarako, Jinsei Shinzaki B. Vampiro Kanadiense, Hanzo Nakajima and Men's Teo and Dick Togo B. Super Delphin and Grand Hamada and Great Sasuke Independent Junior title, Takamichinoku B. Grand Naniwa, Uwa Middleweight title Shoichi Funaki B. Masato Yakashiji. March 30 Osaka, Muga Promotions, 2580, One-Night Tournament Shane Liss B. Giula, Karashima B. Shota Darren Maroons B. Wood, Osamu Nishimura B. Guy Bacon, List BB Kurashima, Nishimura B Maroons Tatsumi Fujinami B Shinichi Nakano, Rigby B Nishimura to win tournament. March 31st Roanoke, Virginia, WCW Monday Nitro tapings, 8,709 sellout with 8,175 paid. Lex Luger and the Giant B Roadblock and Rick Fuller, Toshie Uematsu B Mako Satomura, Psychosis BV Yano 4, WCW TV title. B Hugh Morris, Diamond Dallas Page B Lance Ringo, Steiner's B High Voltage. Special thanks to Bobby Baum, Georgianne Macropolis, Kevin Heilbronner, Joe Grana, Etta Hearns, Jose Steve, Edie Bailey, Mike Mahoney Jr., Chuck Morris, Dan Bird, Dan Paris, Wilson Rivera II, Manuel Gonzalez, Rich Palladino, Dominic Valenti, Steve Dr. Lucha Sims, Roland Alexander, Neil O'Brien, Jesse Money. Japanese television rundown. March 2nd All Japan. 1. Misawa pinned Williams to retain the Triple Crown in 27:52. The last 19 minutes aired on television. It was a good match, but not on the level of a typical Budokan Hall main event. Misawa's work was solid with mainly the forearms combined with a few suplexes and his elbow suicida tope. Williams was sloppy in spots but worked well in others. These two have had numerous matches a whole lot better than this. It was still a very stiff, long believable main event, but it lacked in heat much of the way since they were playing to an audience that expects match of the year in the title matches. Misawa eventually won with 2 German suplexes, a whole slew of elbow smashes, 2 Tiger drivers and finally finishing with a Tiger driver dropping Williams on the back of his head, Tiger driver 91, for the fall. 3¼ stars. March 16th All Japan. 1. Ace and Mossman beat Hansen and Rex King in 11:39 when Mossman pinned King with a German suplex. Ace and King at times weren't on the same page. The last half aired on TV. Mossman showed promise in spots and looked really green in other spots. 1 star. 2. Akiyama and Shiga beat Kobashi and Kanemaru in 17:06 when Shiga pinned Kanemaru with a flying kick off the ropes to the back of the head. It was Kanemaru's television debut. He's about 5'5", 150 pounds or thereabouts. Absolutely tiny by all Japan standards. Definitely a good athlete and already a good solid worker, but because of his size it was hard for him to work this style with Akiyama. He was good with Shiga as it now gives Shiga somebody he can beat up on. Good match, nice near falls at the end. The focus was mainly on Shiga versus Kanemaru with Akiyama and Kobashi mainly destroying them when they were in. 3½ stars. March 23rd All Japan. This was a weird show. They aired the last minute of the first night of Carnival with Tao pinning Ace, Kobashi over Amori and Kawada over Honda. They also aired the last few minutes of Misawa versus Albright, which had no crowd heat at all and had a dead finish with Misawa going over, although Albright's suplexes were killer. Based on crowd reactions, it appeared that of the 4 matches Tao versus Ace was probably the best. Most of the show was a look back at the career of Joe Higuchi. They showed Higuchi clips on every television show in March including his farewell at Budokan clips every week. This show seemed to be his final send-off, airing Higuchi's ref bumps in big matches and his pinfall counts in famous matches like Jumbo Tsuruta beating Bruiser Brody for the international title or Giant Baba winning the NWA title from Jack Briscoe. It's really amazing to watch old All Japan clips. This conservative old-style promotion with no juice, no real feuds, no gimmick finishes, clean pinfalls in every match and hard solid ring work, was actually built for its first 15+ years on non-finishes in key matches, lots of ref bumps, and bloody feuding brawls with guys like Abdullah the Butcher, the Sheik, Tiger Jeet Singh, Stan Hansen and Bruiser Brody using the blade and in many cases not exactly having the greatest technical work around. I can't imagine there has ever been this kind of attention ever paid to the send-off of a referee in pro wrestling history. Puerto Rico. The Universal title was held up after a match on March 22nd in Yabuco between Carlos Colon and Jim Steele. The finish saw a ref bump while Colon used La Tapatía, the upside-down surfboard also known as the Rito Romero Special. The regular referee got up and counted since Colon had his shoulders on the mat. Actually, when doing the hold the guy's shoulders are always on the mat, while the second ref at the same point signaled for the bell claiming Steele had submitted. The referees began arguing with each other and it would up with the commissioner in the ring ordering the belt held up to build up the March 29th show in Bayamonde where the title was decided. The rest of the Bayamon show had Invader No. 1 versus Chicky Star, with the ring surrounded by 3-inch nails, Ray Gonzalez versus Huracan Castillo for the Puerto Rican title, Ricky Santana and La Ley defend the WWC tag titles against Ram Man and Doug Masters, Chuck Singer defends the lightweight title against Alex G and Pablo Marquez versus Skull Von Crush.
Singer won the American lightweight title back from Marquez on March 16 in Caguas. Singer is apparently from Tulsa.
The rival WWA announced a tour from April 11 to April 13 with Ahmed Johnson, Hunter Hearst Helmsley and Savio Vega.
They announced the Undertaker title win. Vega appeared as a heel on this group's March 12 television tapings, interfering helping Bronco retain the Puerto Rican title over Pulgarcito, and was also scheduled on the March 26 tapings. Danny Boy holds this promotion's lightweight title, having beaten the Black Scorpion in a tourney final.
Previous champ was El Rockero, who has disappeared.
EMLL. Most of the main events this past week has involved using foreign heels Miguel Perez, Steel, Sean Morley, Foreign Exchange, Jose Estrada Jr., and Leatherface, Rick Patterson. On March 25 at Arena Coliseo, Steel and Exchange and Leatherface beat EMLL heels Emilio Charles Jr. and Apollo Dantes and Scorpio Jr. when Steel used a low blow to pin Charles.
On the same show in the semi-final, Lismark and Dandy and Brazo de Plata beat El Satanico and Rey Bucanero and Gran Marcus Jr. when Dandy pinned Satanico clean. Dandy and Satanico issued both hair versus hair and title. Satanico holds the CMLL middleweight title. Challenges back and forth, so expect something to result in the next week or two.
The March 21 show for the Lutteroth 100th anniversary drew approximately 10,000 fans, which would be the best crowd of the year at Arena Mexico and biggest crowd since the Santo Dandy Casas Triangle last year. The funny part of the show is that there wasn't one member of the Lutteroth family present at the show, including Paco Alonso. Seemed the family all got together and had a big party in Tijuana.
Don't have much in the way of details on the March 28 Arena Mexico show.
Main was Rayo de Jalisco Jr. and Brazo de Plata and Atlantis versus Steel and Leatherface and Foreign Exchange.
The big deal was a 14-man tournament throwing all the good workers in one match: Negro Casas, Dandy, La Fiera, El Texano, Mr. Niebla, Mascara Magica, Shocker Perez, Dr. Wagner Jr., Scorpio Jr., Elio del Santo, Silver King, Felino and Black Warrior.
It started with a battle royal with the stipulations that the first 7 men eliminated would then form a tag team against the 7 remaining, and they would battle under elimination tag team rules, Survivor Series rules. It came down to Fiera pinning Silver King to ultimately win the deal. Santo is still working as a heel at Arena Mexico, but on the EMLL shows on Thursday and Sunday in Mexico City is still working as a face. Promo Azteca. Only info is that the major show of the weekend was March 28 in Cuernavaca with Mascara Sagrada and Lismark Jr. and Zorro vs. Cien Caras and Pirata Morgan and Pantera del Ring and Villanos 3 and 5 and Psicosis vs. Mascara Año 2000 and Universo 2000 and Black Dragon. AAA. Razor Ramon and Diesel continue to headline the shows here. They are building up a feud with Ramon feuding with Cibernetico. It started when they introduced a mini Cibernetico.
On March 18 in Pachuca, Mini Cibernetico did a run-in as Ramon and Diesel were abusing Big Cibernetico, and of course the Mini took a beating.
On March 22 in Durango in a trios match, Mini Cibernetico gave Ramon a low blow which incapacitated him for a while.
Just so you know that bad announcing when it comes to foreign talent is a universal. On the same weekend that apparently Howard Finkel, who I thought never makes a mistake ring announcing, I didn't see Shotgun because it doesn't air, but this is what's been told to me, announced Hysteria as the winner in a match against Venom, which Venom won, and the one showing a clip of Diesel using a tombstone piledriver. Martinete on Pero Aguayo from Pachuca. The announcers called the angle as if it was Ramon that did the piledriver. They also ran an angle likely for Triple Mania, as during a match with La Calaca and Crazy 33 and Jerry Estrada against the Love Machines, Hector Garza and Heavy Metal and Latin Lover, Picudo came out of the audience and broke a bottle over Heavy's head, and he was pinned and did a stretcher job. The beer bottle to the head a few years back on Pero Aguayo was one of the most effective angles this company ever did, but they've gone back to it so many times that it doesn't mean much now. Pena is introducing 2 new wrestlers, one called Scarecrow and the other called Schizophrenia. You can fill in your own joke as to who is under that mask. Pentagon challenged Octagon for a Mexican middleweight title match for Veracruz. Jake Roberts is scheduled to appear on April 5 in Acapulco. All Japan. In the biggest result of the past week's Champion Carnival tournament, Kenta Kobashi scored his first pinfall victory over Mitsuharu Misawa in the main event on March 28 in Nagaoka before a sellout 3,200 fans in 24:09 after 5 clotheslines. Misawa had previously beaten Kobashi in all 7 of their singles matches. It was something of a surprise that All Japan would book such a major result that fans had been waiting years to see on a non-television card in a mid-sized city.
The major show of the week was the television taping on March 30th in Nagoya before 6,500 fans, where the carnival results being Misawa going to a 30-minute draw with Toshiaki Kawada in what was said to have been a great match. Kobashi pinned Jun Akiyama in 2013 with a lariat. Akira Tao pinned Gary Albright in 8:03 with a high kick, and Stan Hansen pinned Johnny Ace in 14:08 with a lariat.
Also, Yuhi Sano of UWFI, now Kingdom Promotions, made an All Japan appearance teaming with Masa Fuchi to beat Tornado, Richard Slinger, and Johnny Smith.
The Misawa vs. Kawada and the Sano match comprised the television show that aired that night.
It's a solid crowd for All Japan for Nagoya, but considering how strong the lineup was, the show should have drawn better than a solid crowd.
Tournament standings as of March 31st: 1. Akira Tao, 5-0, 10 points. 2. Kenta Kobashi, 4-0, 8 points. 3. Stan Hansen, 2-0-1, 5 points. 4. Toshiaki Kawada, 5-1-1, 11 points. 5. Mitsuharu Misawa, 3-1-1, 7 points. 6. Johnny Ace, 4-2, 8 points. 7. Steve Williams, 1-1-1, 3 points. 8. Jun Akiyama, 1-3, 2 points. 9.
Giant Kimala 2-1-4, 2 points. 10.
Gary Albright, 0-3, 0 points. 11. Takao Mori, 0-4, 0 points. Tamon Honda, 0-4, 0 points.
Jun Izumida forfeited all his tournament matches due to a broken leg that should keep him out of action the next 3 months. Since it's relatively certain Izumida wasn't going to beat any of the top names, his being out of action doesn't screw up the meticulously put-together tournament booking the way losing Williams would have. This week's tournament results were on March 26th in Fukui. Kimala 2 upset Akiyama in 12:39 with a big splash. Tao pinned Williams in 18:30 with a choke slam. March 28th in Nagaoka, Tao pinned 2 with a choke slam in 6:50. Hansen drew Williams over 30 minutes and Kobashi pinned Misawa.
March 29th in Nagarayama, Ace pinned Amori in 18:23. Kawada pinned Kimala 2 in 7:07.
Jumbo Tsuruta officially got his professor degree on March 25th and will become a full-time professor at 3 different Tokyo colleges.
March 16th television show did a 4.4 rating and March 23rd did a 3.1 rating. New Japan. New Japan held its 25th anniversary party on March 25th in Tokyo. The biggest angle is that Eric Bischoff and Sonny Ono from WCW were there, and that Masa Saito quit New Japan to join the NWO. They also presented the new $90,000 IWGP World Heavyweight title belt to Shinya Hashimoto. Several names from other groups attended the party, including Genichiro Tenryu, Koji Kiao, Shinya Kojika, Ikamasa Wakamatsu, a famous manager in Calgary and Japan from years back, George Takano, and Animal Hamaguchi. Most of the promotional push has revolved around trying to get Naoya Ogawa over, as the advance for the Tokyo Dome show is said to still be pretty soft. Although nothing has been announced, the May 3rd Osaka Dome show will probably involve all or most of the members of the NWO, including Hulk Hogan, Randy Savage, Kevin Nash, and Scott Hall, as Bischoff and Ono are going over for it as well, and there is some talk that some of the matches will be taped for American television. On the last tour, New Japan sold 11,000 NWO t-shirts at $25 a pop. However, I'm told there was no special heat at the Tokyo Gym for the NWO matches except for Marcus Bagwell, and even though the crowd was announced as a sellout 11,000, it was really closer to 3/4 of a house, which was a disappointing house for such a heavily pushed card. Jushin Liger went to the Michinoku Pro Show on March 30th in Akita to build up his match with Great Sasuke. Liger wound up issuing a challenge to Michinoku Pro heels Dick Togo and men's Teo and Hanzo Nakajima for a 1-on-3 match later this year at either an MPW or a New Japan show. Keiji Muto missed the small shows due to a left knee injury but will be working the Dome. New Japan ran 2 minor house shows on March 28th and March 29th at hotel ballrooms, while Tatsumi Fujinami ran his own Muga Promotions show on March 30th in Osaka, which drew 2,580 as Fujinami beat Shinichi Nakano of Wrestle Dream Factory, and there was a one-night tournament won by Shane Lispy of Lancashire, England, beating New Japan's Osamu Nishimura in the finals. March 15th television show did a 1.8 rating, while the March 23rd show, which was a Sunday afternoon special with the March 20th Nagoya card airing, did a 6.2 rating. Even though it was the second highest rated show of the year, that number is nowhere near as impressive due to the time slot as some of the All Japan post-midnight ratings have been in recent weeks. Other Japan notes. The major show of the week was the March 28th Rings show, which drew a sellout 6,872 at Tokyo Bay NK Hall for the Akira Maeda vs Kiyoshi Tamura match, which Maeda won with a choke sleeper in 7:54.
On one hand, this result is ridiculous, but it does fit with Japanese pattern booking. Tamura is the best worker in the promotion, and Maeda totally lacks credibility in a supposed work-shoot environment because he's so slow and not in good shape.
However, it is still the Maeda name that sells the tickets, and besides being the head of the promotion, keeping him strong is the right thing for business. Last year, a lot of the wrestlers resented Maeda bringing in Yoshiaki Fujiwara for a big show in Osaka, but that show drew more than 8,000 fans. They did a storyline of the Maeda-Tamura match and that Tamura wouldn't do anything to attack Maeda's often injured knees, and after the match Maeda praised Tamura for his sportsmanship in doing so. Besides, the short term is building up for a Maeda vs Falcon main event on the next major card April 22nd in Osaka, so from that standpoint the Maeda win also makes sense. However, Maeda does need to put Tamura over once before his retirement.
Both Mitsuya Nagai and Masayuki Naruse missed the show due to still being out from injuries from appearing on the Shoot show on February 2nd in Amsterdam, Holland. Naruse is said to be suffering from rubella.
Battle Arts wrestler Minoru Tanaka worked the Rings show in a first-round match of the 209-pound weight class tournament, beating Todor Todorov. Great Sasuke was already back in action from the fractured orbital bone, working on March 25th in Namioka and working the rest of the shows this past week. Although he's nowhere close to 100%, Taka Michinoku has been winning his matches with submissions to build up his appearance on the April 27th Pancrase show. Michinoku's major show of the week was March 30th, where Shuichi Funaki retaining the UA, Mexico, middleweight belt, beating Masato Yakashiji, subbing for injured Shiryu, and Taka Michinoku retained the independent, FMW, junior title, beating Grand Naniwa.
FMW ran Korakuen Hall on March 28th before a sellout 2,150 fans with a street fight on top, with Katsutoshi Niyama and Mr. Ganasuke and Hisakatsu Oya beating Hayabusa and Masato Tanaka and Koji Nakagawa. Atsushi Onita was at the show and they shot an angle where the Headhunters and Super Leather and a Gladiator jumped him backstage and beat him up in the Korakuen Hall showers, and of course he juiced heavily. Onita then accepted the challenge for April 29th at Yokohama Arena, teaming with Wing Kanemura and Tanaka against Terry Funk and Gladiator and the Mystery Partner. Also on the show was a women's bunkhouse match with Linus Ashika teaming with Shark Tsuchiya to beat Megami Kudo and Bison Kimura when Tsuchiya pinned the soon-to-be retiring Kudo. After the match, Kudo said that she would wrestle Tsuchiya on the April 29th show in an explosive barbed wire match. Hiromichi Fuyuki's promotion debuted on March 29th in Tokyo before 1,823, with Fuyuki and Geto and Jado keeping their six-man street fight title from the FMW promotion, beating Great Kabuki and Masao Orihara and Keisuke Yamada. Wrestlers from FMW, All Japan Women, JD and IWA all appeared on the first card. The next card will be April 19th in Ogaki, with Fuyuki and Geto and Jado defending against Super Leather and Flying Kid Ichihara and a Mystery Partner, and they run May 8th at Korakuen Hall. Ryuma Go will be restarting his Samurai Pro Wrestling promotion with a show on April 16th at Korakuen Hall. His last company ran out of money, but he got a new $80,000 sponsorship to start a new company. Koji Kiao and Tarzan Goto will work his first show. The masked horse on the current Big Japan tour is Manny Fernandez. Bison Kimura is the latest woman wrestler to pose for nude magazine photos. USWA. The March 29th show in Memphis drew an estimated 500 with a couple of title switches as Brian Christopher regained the USWA title from Elijah after hitting him with a chain, and Flash Flanagan and Billy Travis regained the USWA tag titles, beating Interrogator and Rykon of the Truth Commission. There are an awful lot of people who seem to think this promotion is on its last legs, as they are doing in the range of $10,000 total business per week. Apparently Larry Burton and Mike Samples are doing a lot of the work putting the weekly television shows together. There were a lot of irate phone calls to WMC in Memphis when they showed a clip of Queen Nikki's butt, to the point that station manager Mason Granger wanted to see the tape. It's funny what can and can't be gotten away with depending on the city and the time slot. They are trying to use interviewer Stacy in a sunny role and present her as sexy, but even though she's a pretty woman, she is said to lack television charisma. Elliot Pollock did an interview saying he was at WrestleMania and the WWF wrestlers were laughing at USWA, so he challenged WWF wrestlers to come in and face USWA wrestlers. That was the explanation for Razor Ramon and Diesel heading in soon. Christopher in particular said he wanted to face any WWF wrestler. Steve Boz from Chicago, who is said to have been the most impressive newcomer to hit this circuit in a long time, is being rewarded by being a television jobber. The other newcomer who is said to be a bright spot in the Commandant of the Truth Commission, the actor friend of Bret Hart's from South Africa, who will probably be WWF bound as a manager before long. USWA announced it would be holding tryouts for wrestlers interested in coming into the territory on April 25. For more info, call 800-846-3002. ECW. They ran 3 shows over the weekend, with March 28 in Allentown, Pennsylvania drawing 1,186 fans, March 29 in New Kensington, Pennsylvania near Pittsburgh, drawing an estimated 850. ECW reported the crowd at 1,768 and $31,000, but all other estimates were 750 to 1,000, and one reader hand-counted and got 850. And March 30 in Monaca, Pennsylvania, also near Pittsburgh, for a TV taping drawing more than 1,000. Overall, with merchandise that topped $22,000 over the 2 dates in the Pittsburgh market since it was the first time in, it was the most money ECW has ever taken in on a weekend. Bad news was a pair of injuries, as Chris Condito had a partial tear of his right bicep in Allentown and was in a sling the rest of the weekend. No word at press time how long he'd be out of action, but there was a good chance he'd need surgery, and that would keep him out of action for quite some time. Sandman suffered 3 cracked ribs on the same show, and they did angles before his scheduled matches the next 2 nights where he was attacked by the heels and couldn't do the matches, but he's expected to work the pay-per-view. Louis Spicolli also suffered a swollen shut-eye from an accidental knee by Sabu on the Monaco show. Intermedia Partners in Nashville, which originally wasn't going to air the pay-per-view, has changed its policy by making it very clear that ECW is theater and not sport. It appears a lot of the cable opposition to it is dissipating, and that if the first show can do a buy rate, the universe should be quite a bit larger on the second show. Pitbull #1 didn't wrestle on the weekend shows as he was selling his neck injury from the I Quit match with Shane Douglas, attending the shows wearing a neck brace. In Allentown during a 3-way dance with Eliminators, Dudleys, and Gangstas, won by Dudleys, New Jack dove off a Ryder truck onto Devon through a table. Also on that show, Tommy Dreamer and Beulah beat Shane Douglas and Francine when Rick Rude under the mask distracted Francine, and Raven pinned Stevie Richards in a match with Sandman as ref. Sandman came out with a beer cooler and was sitting on the turnbuckles drinking beer and smoking as the match was going on. Apparently merchandise sales the first night in Pittsburgh were huge. They searched fans to confiscate weapons on the show. They found tons of knives being brought in. New Jack was the only wrestler on the show to blade, and he also got the biggest reaction coming out. Terry Funk got no reaction coming out or for his match with Brian Lee. Tracy Smothers and Little Guido worked as the FBI, with Tommy Rich as their manager. Before the Raven Sandman match in New Kensington, Pennsylvania, Sandman was attacked by Brian Lee, so it wound up Raven versus Richards in a brawl all over the place with Terry Funk and many others involved. In Monaca, Pennsylvania, Taz and Sabu got into another altercation after Sabu pinned Louis Spicolli and Taz choked out Spicolli. Van Dam also wound up arguing with both Sabu and Taz. Main event saw Dudleys beat Eliminators and Gangstas in a 3-way dance when Sign Guy broke a pane of glass on Perry Saturn. The television show this past week featured the Michinoku Pro match from mid-February, and it was a sensational match, complete with Sasuke doing the Asai moonsault and landing with his shins cracking the stage. Joey Styles did a tremendous job announcing the match in that he called almost all the and at least knew who all 6 wrestlers were and tried to get it over as a match. Lots of rumors regarding Van Dam leaving for WCW. Supposedly when asked about his martial arts background, Van Dam told someone over the weekend, "Wait a few weeks and you'll hear about it from Mike Tenay on Nitro." Sabu has definitely sent out feelers to WWF, although the impression I got is that they aren't head over heels about him due to his track record. Paul Heyman said he has Sabu under contract until the end of the year. There's also a situation going on with Sabu in Japan. Sabu wasn't booked on this tour since he'd missed the pay-per-view if he was, and it's just as well since it's the Carnival Tour and all he'd do is put everyone over. He originally wasn't booked on the May tour either, but when the Patriot quit, Baba asked Sabu to do the tour. Sabu has been telling people now that he wants to go to Pancrase because he feels he needs to prove he's really tough, but that would be absolutely insane because it would kill his gimmick in Japan and that he couldn't do anything he's famous for doing. Plus with all the injuries he already has, he could get hurt doing that style. There was a backstage near fight after the March 30th show. Douglas was the promoter of the 2 Pittsburgh area events. A lot of the ECW spot shows are promoted by the wrestlers. Bubba Ray Dudley does the Long Island shows. Chris Condito will be promoting the New Jersey shows. During the show, Brian Lee suplexed Pitbull #2 through the concessions table.
Several weeks back there was a brawl that broke the concession table that resulted in a lot of merchandise stolen, and the same thing happened this time, and Douglas was hot at the wrestlers. Douglas wound up arguing with Smothers until Rich pulled Smothers out of there.
There has been tremendous backstage stress of late over the situation with Van Dam possibly leaving, WCW coming into Philadelphia, and more than anything else, all the pressure because the pay-per-view show is really about to happen and nobody really knows how well it'll do.
Heyman gave a 75-minute-long speech after the show saying that this is the time everyone needed to pull together as a group.
Apparently during the speech he talked about Sabu and everything Sabu has been through, apparently trying to put Sabu over, and had Sabu in tears, and Sabu is now talking about staying for the long haul and even promoting ECW shows in Michigan and Indiana. Heyman also said that if anyone from the company went to the WCW show on April 14th, not to ever talk to him again, and that any relationships, business or friendship, would be over. He said that if anyone wanted to leave the promotion, contract or no contract, to tell him now, and he'd get anyone who wanted a meeting with McMahon or give them a release to talk to WCW. Nobody said anything about officially leaving, although Van Dam did tell Heyman he's considering going to WCW and gave the impression he'd be staying through at least June at this point. They seem to be building Sandman and Balls Mahoney eventually becoming a tag team, as they are getting Mahoney over for swinging the nastiest chair shots. They aired clips of another match between the two with similarly stiff blows back and forth. ECW will get back on television in Atlanta on WLTW on Fridays at midnight and on Pass in Detroit. Funk is talking about slowing down in regards to working in the US around September. Here and there. Lineup for the Eddie Gilbert Memorial Brawl on April 12th in Cherry Hill, New Jersey is King Kong Bundy vs. Kimala, Ace Starling vs. Flash Funk, Goldust vs. Derek Domino, Ian Rotten vs. Tommy Gilbert, and you say Style Clash, Doug Gilbert vs. Buddy Landel, and Dan Severn vs. Dory Funk for the NWA title. Jim Cornette will also manage on the show. At 10 a.m. on April 13th at the Holiday Inn in Cherry Hill, they'll have a contest session with Cornette, Bill Watts, Harley Race, Severn, Funk, the Gilberts, promoter Dennis Coralluzzo, and several others. T.C. Martin was back in business over the weekend with his NWC in Sacramento, California on March 28th, drawing 370 fans for a death match between Sabu vs. Severn for Sabu's NWC title, which ended without a winner when Bam Bam Bigelow did a run-in. Was told the match was awful due to the style clash, and the fans were really upset about the non-finish in a death match, particularly since the previous top matches, Bigelow vs. Jim Neidhart and Virgil subbing for no-show Junkyard Dog vs. Honky Tonk Man, also had non-finishes and were awful as well. Rob Van Dam and Bobby Bradley worked as aerial assault against the Haystacks brothers, one of whom was Bradley's younger brother Wayne, which was said to have been the best match. They announced a May 25th show in the same building with Honky vs. Jake Roberts on top. At the All-Pro Wrestling Gym Wars matches on March 29th in Hayward, California, promoter Roland Alexander talked about bringing in Gary Albright, Rey Mysterio Jr., and Psychosis. The idea is to run a weekend in conjunction with area indie promoter Kirk White. The two are working together, but it appears are building up a promotion versus promotion angle as well, where they'd split trans costs on the guys and run shows in Fremont and Hayward. Corey Philpott, a running back with the CFL's British Columbia Lions, did a special ref spot on the International Championship Wrestling show on March 29th in Cloverdale, BC. Championship Wrestling on April 19th in Martinsburg, West Virginia at Berkeley County Fairgrounds has Greg Valentine vs. Tito Santana. Mention the Observer and get $1 off GA tickets. On the March 28th Century Wrestling Alliance show in Bristol, Rhode Island, headlined by Public Enemy vs. Ace Starling and Devon Storm, Rocco Rock was supposed to put ref Scott Dickinson, who also refs WCW, through a table and 3 times jumped off onto the table and it didn't break, but it finally did break on the 4th attempt. IPWA on April 12th in Chantilly, Virginia has Iron Sheik, Salvatore Sincere, Missy Hyatt, Debbie Combs, and Malia Hasaka. Cleveland All-Pro Wrestling on April 12th at West Park Party Center. Speaking of Hyatt, and it seems we are almost every week, she was on a Howard Stern Easter special with Stern finger painting her boobs. NHB. Some notes on Royce Alger, who has to be the favorite to win the under 200 division in the next UFC. Alger is a 2-time NCAA champion from Iowa and a 2-time gold medalist in the World Cup, plus has 6 years' experience as a Golden Gloves boxing champion. Alger was a rival in college of Kevin Jackson, who looked so impressive in the EFC. The two were roughly even when it came to wrestling ability, but the belief by those familiar with both's background is that Alger would win an NHB match between the two. WCW. Sarkis Hazuri, 38, a student at the power plant known as Sharky, was murdered on March 28 in Marietta, Georgia. As he was coming out of a mall exit from his regular job, he was cut off. He got out of his car and went up to the window of the driver. A short fight ensued and the driver of the car drew a gun and shot him. The alleged perpetrator, who was on probation for drug violations, turned himself in as there were a number of witnesses as this took place during rush hour traffic. Nitro on March 31 from Roanoke, Virginia before 8,709, 8,175 paying $94,070, was a really messed up show saved only in part because of a hot live crowd. Hulk Hogan, Eric Bischoff and Ted DiBiase weren't there. Hogan and Bischoff were in Chicago at the premiere of Dennis Rodman's new movie, and DiBiase may have been there as well, but I'm not certain of that. Scott Hall wasn't there, and it was only acknowledged in an interview at the end of the show with Kevin Nash where Nash said that Hall is taking care of problems far more important than wrestling. A lot of the Hall situation has to do with his marriage possibly disintegrating over the past 2 weeks. There is no word on what is going to happen in regard to the weekend pay-per-view show where Hall and Nash are scheduled to defend the belts against the Steiners. On TV, they were pushing the Four Corners match with Luger, Giant and Harlem Heat as the main event. The only acknowledgement that Hall may not be there was Nash saying that he didn't know whether or not Hall would be there and that if he wasn't, he'd take on both Steiners by himself. When Bischoff was in Japan for the New Japan party, he was telling people that Hall would be wrestling on the pay-per-view show. Hall missed all the weekend shots, although he was advertised as being in all the cities. It's really bad how WCW handled the Hall situation in regard to its lack of ethics in dealing with paying customers. Nash also in his interview and throughout the show teased the idea that he, Six and Hall were tired of Hogan and Bischoff and that they would break away as they were talking with Scott Norton and M. Wall Street early in the show about which side they were on. There is no question that at some point Hall and Nash will draw a ton of money feuding with Hogan and Savage, but I don't see that happening anytime soon, because it's too soon to make that move. Nitro was really bad except for the crowd reactions to the 2 segments Ric Flair appeared on, although Flair's performance was nothing special. Lex Luger and Giant beat Roadblock and Rick Fuller. Harlem Heat attacked them after and they had a short brawl. He did an interview and the way it was conducted made it sound more like a tag team match than a Four Corners everyone versus everyone match. They introduced the WCW Women's Cruiserweight title belt. Please explain why they need a Women's Cruiserweight belt? With Toshie Uematsu beating Meiko Satomura in a first-round match. These are young women from the Gia promotion. Why WCW is affiliated with Gia is one of life's great mysteries, but again shows that the people who make decisions on international wrestling have no clue about wrestling internationally. This match was real bad because the women are inexperienced. The idea was to have Sonoko Kato versus Malia Hasaka on Saturday night and have the winner of that match face Uematsu next week on Nitro to determine the new champion, but after this match was so weak, there are a lot of second thoughts about it. Psicosis pinned Viano 4. Some nice moves, but the match didn't flow and should have been better. Psicosis did one of the hottest moves ever, a corkscrew moonsault plancha, but the move didn't even get a big pop because it wasn't set up well. Flair came out for an interview, and Roddy Piper then came out. At first they teased they were going to be enemies, but the idea was to set them up to work as a tag team down the line. It got a tremendous reaction, but neither made any sense at all, but luckily for them, they're the two who can get away with it. Prince Iaukea pinned La Parka in a TV title match in 4:35. Parka did some great moves, but the match was a total disaster. They weren't even reading the same book, let alone on the same page. It appears this Iaukea experiment ends on Sunday and it didn't work and was made worse by week after week, putting him over top caliber guys. Steve Regal did an interview talking about wrestling Iaukea and hinting that after he wins the TV title back, his next program will be with Rey Mysterio Jr. It's like they never learn. Regal was then pinned by Chris Jericho, but beat up Jericho after the match. Renegade did a run-in, but then just stood there and did nothing. Joe Gomez ran in and he was beaten up while his tag partner Renegade watched. The world was just waiting for the Renegade versus Joe Gomez feud. Billy Kidman and Lenny Lane also ran in and were destroyed by Regal. Akira Hokuto retained the women's title, pinning Debbie Combs. Like you need 2 women's matches on the same show. Can you say style clash? When Hokuto came to the ring, she looked in the camera and said Kusobaba, which I'm told means something to the extent of old lady bitch. French Canadians beat Jeff Jarrett and Steve McMichael when Public Enemy got the briefcase from Deborah McMichael, but Jarrett fought them off. It wound up with Rob Parker getting the briefcase and giving it to Jacques, who hit Steve and he was pinned. When McMichael finally got up, he saw Jarrett with the briefcase and the two started arguing again. Chris Benoit pinned Hugh Morris with a German suplex. Kevin Sullivan and Conan jumped Benoit. Jacqueline ran out and knocked Nancy down and splashed Benoit off the top, while wearing high heels no less. She went up for a second splash, but Nancy shook the ropes and Jacqueline crotched herself, and Nancy then slapped Jimmy Hart. They asked where the other horsemen were during all this until finally Flair and Arnold Anderson came out. Arn, just getting back from surgery, just stood on the outside while Flair cleaned house with low blows on everyone. Fans went nuts for Flair, but throwing all those punches with his bad shoulder and all, he was beginning to move like Dick the Bruiser in his final big run. Last week the angle was that it was Sullivan that attacked Anderson in the hotel after the interview. This week the angle is that Anderson and Sullivan have always been good friends outside the ring. Benoit did an interview with Flair and Anderson hinted at a split, saying he was going to win the U.S. title for himself, not the Horseman. There is some speculation that eventually it'll come out that it was Benoit who attacked Anderson in the hotel, since the idea for not all that long down the road is for a Benoit versus Flair feud and for Benoit to form his own Horseman, possibly with Dean Malenko and or Chris Jericho and or Steve Regal. Diamond Dallas Page pinned Lance Ringo. Don't know who Ringo was, but he showed potential. Finally Steiner's beat High Voltage, and Nash did the show closing interview. Because of a problem at Nielsen, ratings for March 31st weren't available at press time. Weekend numbers saw a main event at 1.5, Saturday night at 2.0 due to the NCAA basketball tournament going head-to-head, and Pro at 1.4. The Montreal advance for April 11th is up to about 4,300 tickets and $131,500, so it should wind up doing pretty well. Philadelphia on April 14th was at 12,700 tickets and $181,000, while Tupelo on April 6th was at 4,400 tickets and $72,000. First day sales for the pay-per-view with Dennis Rodman in Daytona Beach was 1,500 tickets and $50,000. A house show on April 19th in Grand Rapids, Michigan has already topped 7,700 tickets sold, while the April 28th Norfolk advance for Nitro has topped $63,000. The working idea for the May pay-per-view in Charlotte is Flair and Piper and McMichael versus Kevin Green and Reggie White and Jarrett. The idea of using Green in Charlotte in what would be a heel role, since he was facing Flair and Piper, sounds totally weird on the surface. The big local draw and heat would be putting Flair, the local wrestling icon, and Green, the local football hero, as teammates. Using Green has its merit since he'll probably do wrestling after football and he has a storyline, even though I don't see him as a pay-per-view draw. But whatever it is costing to get White, he was asking $500,000, is really questionable since he's not Rodman, and it just dilutes using Green and Rodman, similar to having a great angle and repeating it on every show. Even though Rodman is injured and out of action for the rest of the regular season in basketball, WCW talked with his people about possibly postponing the match until later in the year, but they were assured he'd be fine in July and was just resting up the knee for the playoffs. The big long-term plan now is to turn Starrcade into their version of WrestleMania, and holding the Hogan vs. Sting match off until then, and trying to promote it as the biggest match in the history of the company. The June 28th house show at the Forum in Los Angeles is going to get a major promotion effort and build as Saturday Nitro, with all the trappings, interviews, pyro, celebrity and athlete guests, etc. of a Nitro taping, but for a regular house show. That's because WWF is running a show head-to-head at the Pond in Anaheim, and it's becoming a real arena wrestling war, particularly since WCW just finished the most successful house show month in the history of the company, which was this March, grossing just under $1 million. Scott Hudson starts this week as an announcer and will be doing the Saturday morning TBS main event show. Kurt Hennig, Brad Rheingans and Wayne Bloom were all backstage at the March 24th Nitro in Duluth. Hennig has been training at Rheingans' camp for his comeback, which should be in a few more weeks. The TV taping on March 25th in Dalton, Georgia drew a $7,000 house and not $10,000 as reported here last week, with 1,200 paid. Marcus Bagwell has been out of action with a hip injury suffered in Japan. Weekend house shows saw March 27th in Baltimore draw $8,068 and $129,384. March 28th in Johnstown, Pennsylvania drew $4,295 and $53,264, and March 29th in Charleston, West Virginia drew $6,398 and $64,089. In more impressive than the gates are the merchandise numbers, particularly doing $42,000 in Charleston and $60,000 at Nitro in Roanoke. What will surprise a lot of people is that right now the WCW merchandise is doing about a 70-30 edge over the NWO merchandise. On the March 27th Baltimore show, the best match according to every report was said to have been the U.S. title match where Dean Malenko pinned Jericho. Rey Mysterio Jr. beat Super Calo. The death match saw Kevin Sullivan beat Chris Benoit. This was taped for television and finish saw Jacqueline splash Benoit off the top, and after the match, Ben Sullivan, Kevin's son, hit the ring and hit Kevin with a chair, as in the storyline he's siding with Nancy. Ben Sullivan was in Kevin's corner later that weekend on a Century Wrestling Alliance show in Bristol, Rhode Island. Randy Savage pinned Diamond Dallas Page due to interference from Kevin Nash. Savage then teamed with Nash, replacing Hull, in a tag title defense against Luger and Giant, which had a dusty finish where Luger had Nash in the rack, but at the same time Page hit the ring and attacked Savage, and the ref called it a DQ for the outside interference instead of the title switch. After the match, Giant choke slammed Nick Patrick. On the March 28th show in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, Conan teamed with Nash to defend the belts against Luger and Giant with the same finish. Due to many subs underneath, road agent Terry Taylor worked the show, putting over Scotty Riggs. The National Enquirer did run the piece this week regarding Mysterio Jr. and Jennifer Aniston, but there's absolutely nothing to that one. It was just an attempt, which succeeded, to get Mysterio Jr. some pub, since WCW wants to push him big time. If that's the idea, one would think they'd figure out how to book him effectively, like not use him against guys who expose his lack of size, or have him lose on 5 straight PPVs. Some notes on the March 24th ratings. WCW drew a 2.95 rating and 4.49 share to WWF's 2.48 and 3.38. WCW with Conan vs. Malenko opposing Headbangers vs. Hart and Smith drew a 2.8 to 2.1 lead. WWF closed the gap to 3.0 to 2.7, surprisingly, when the Space Cadets did the 6-man match. While Bret Hart did his long angle, WCW started out with a 2.9 to 2.5 lead, but the second part, with the Shawn Michaels angle, saw WWF with a short-lived 2.9 to 2.8 lead, and WCW closed with a 3.3. Steiners vs. Canadians and Iaukea vs. Savage to WWF's 2.3, Johnson vs. Vega and Rush Undertaker angle. WWF. Preliminary reports are that WrestleMania did in 0.77 buy rate, an estimated $2.40 million company gross, which can't be spun as anything other than a disaster. Last year's Mania, for comparison purposes, did a 1.2, and that figure was the lowest for any Mania show in history. Previous low was the 1.5 in 1995. The low number wasn't unexpected at Titan, as the early predictions were in the 0.75 to 0.95 range, but it was within the cable industry that sees Mania as one of the biggest cash bonanzas every year. It was not well promoted until the final week before the show, and having a pay-per-view every weekend for 6 straight weeks did make the show just another Sunday afternoon wrestling pay-per-view rather than the show of the year. The Mania buy rate is actually lower than what several WCW pay-per-view shows have done over the past few months. The WCW Uncensored show 1 week earlier did between 0.7 and 0.9, depending upon who you talk with, so the numbers for the two shows were close. Some changes in the April 20th pay-per-view show due to injuries. Undertaker vs. Vader was changed to Undertaker vs. Mankind, with the show titled Taker's Revenge. Vader suffered a deep knee bruise actually in the Final 4 match and would have been available for the pay-per-view, but the decision was made for him to sit out from Mania until going to Kuwait on April 9th to rest the injury. He needed the knee drained after Mania, so they decided to keep him off TV, and off TV he couldn't shoot the angle, so they gave the spot to Mankind. Vader vs. Undertaker is the tentative main event for the May 11th In Your House in Richmond, Virginia. The 1 vs. 3 match with Ahmed Johnson vs. Farouk and Crush and Savio Vega, with the entire Nation of Domination leaving the WWF should they lose, was also cancelled since Farouk suffered a separated shoulder, bruised ribs and punctured lung, taking the bump off the middle ropes to the floor in the Chicago street fight match. He's going to go on the South Africa tour and make an appearance and perhaps do run-ins, but won't be wrestling until at least late April. There's a good chance that match will be rescheduled for the May 11th pay-per-view. Bret Hart vs. Sid was added to the show in place of that match, while Owen and Bulldog vs. Road Warriors and Jesse Jam vs. Honky Tonk Man's Mystery Guy remain, and one more match will be added. The March 31st Raw was taped March 25th in Peoria before 4,282, paying $55,074. Few would argue that WWF had the better show on that night. It opened with Davey Boy Smith vs. Owen Hart for the European title. They had a very good 14 minutes match. After a ref bump, Bret came out and broke the two of them up and did a lengthy interview blaming the American wrestling fans for breaking up their family. It was another tremendous segment with Owen in tears as Bret ran down their pasts. Bret also got in a knock at some of the brothers, saying that really he and Owen were the only two members of the family that were good wrestlers. Jerry Lawler even pretended to cry and was pretending to do so for the rest of the show, which was a hilarious bit. Bret, Owen and Bulldog are going to form the new Hart Foundation. There is a good chance that they'll add Brian Pillman as the fourth member, but that isn't definite as other ideas have been kicked around as well for Pillman when he returns to the ring.
Apparently Bret has known all along that at some point he was going to have to turn heel, although the decision to do it at that point in time probably wasn't made until the day they started the turn, as he and McMahon had a lengthy private meeting on March 10th before Raw.
Musco Delomber said pinned Supernova in a so-so match.
The announcers paid little attention to it, and even when they did, couldn't call it.
Road Warriors did an interview challenging Hart and Bulldog. Jesse Jam, new spelling, beat Jerry Fox.
Afterwards, Honky Tonk Man came out with a guitar which he called a family heirloom. Hey, that's what he said. It was a mistake on purpose for comedy, not a mistake out of unintentional stupidity, to present to Jam as the guy he was going to take to the top. Jam smashed the guitar on the mat and walked out. The segment was dead and a guy in the front row as a joke held up an applause sign.
Savio Vega and Crush beat Rob Bell and Adam O'Brien.
They did a Ken Shamrock UFC video showing lots of UFC footage.
There was more to this than meets the eye, as it's part of a working relationship between the two promotions. Both groups are going to cooperate with each other in regard to footage, so you might see Ludwig Borga footage on UFC. They've promised not to say anything bad about the other promotion publicly, so UFC can't bury Shamrock publicly for going into pro wrestling if they were thinking in that direction.
And WWF will advertise and push the May 30th UFC pay-per-view. Shamrock will be on next week's show doing a demonstration, which I believe will be done with another Lion's Den fighter.
The Undertaker/Paul Bearer angle wound up with Bearer begging for Undertaker to take him back. Undertaker said he owed Bearer a lot and gave him the WWF title belt.
Bearer turned to the cameras and smirked, showing it was all a ploy, but Undertaker then punched Bearer a few times until Mankind came from under the ring and threw a fireball at Taker. Sid ended up making the save and followed with an interview. True story. At the WCW booking meeting earlier that day, they had laid out the Hokuto vs. Combs women's title match and the remark was made that they are sure to lose that quarter hour, and someone said, well, unless the WWF puts Sid on at the same time. And lo and behold, as they were watching Raw while Hokuto's match was on, there was Sid on the screen. Vince McMahon offered the line of the year thus far in talking with Lawler and talking about the movie Liar, and saying something like he wished Lawler would have to tell the truth for 24 straight hours.
Just imagine if the people running wrestling for 24 hours had to tell the truth.
If you saw the movie, I can just imagine McMahon, or Bischoff, or any other promoter for that matter, in the lead role with the red pen in hand trying like crazy to write that this pen is blue. Goldust vs. Helmsley with the women band was another of their average matches, going 12-20 until Chyna interfered for the DQ. In the pull-apart, Helmsley threw down Pat Patterson. Patterson, 57, who was one of the greatest workers of his era, responded with a comeback flurry that was actually better than what Flair was doing at about the same time.
Chyna ended up attacking Patterson from behind, and the two stomped the hell out of him until Goldust saved him. I got a magazine article about Johnny Lee, billed at 5'9" and 185 pounds, with some photos from a few months back. Let's just say that while she looked like a bodybuilder in the photos, she looked nowhere near as freaky as she does in this role. Steve Austin did his first face promo and Hart appeared on the video screen and the two had words. Shawn Michaels did a phone interview saying he'd be there to confront Hart at next week's Raw, which will be taped on April 6th in Muncie, Indiana. Finally, Rocky Maivia beat Bret Hart by a DQ for the figure 4 around the post in 12:51 of a match where Hart did a real good job carrying Maivia. Austin made the save for Maivia, but then Owen and Bulldog attacked Austin, and the Road Warriors came out, and Road Warriors and Austin chased the three who ran into the stands to get away. Weekend ratings saw Live Wire at 1.4 and Superstars at 1.3. Based on several different versions of the same story, Vince McMahon and Bruce Pritchard had a meeting on the Tuesday before Mania with Kurt and Larry Hennig. According to the version the Hennigs were telling at Nitro the next week, McMahon and Pritchard were 1 hour late and they were just about ready to walk out when they came. The sides were talking about a return to the WWF, and the Hennigs pulled out the letter Pritchard wrote to Lloyd's of London, which resulted in Lloyd's not paying Hennig his reported $350,000 lump sum disability deal. It was basically a deal where Hennig was talking to WWF at the same about returning, and WWF needed to get the legal situation straightened out with Lloyd's as to what their situation was, and it wound up as the blow-up, which ended with Hennig walking out and agreeing to go to WCW. The meeting really didn't go positively for WWF after that, although the idea at that point that it was made clear that business between the two sides was done doesn't appear to be the case either, and there was talk all week of potentially getting Hennig back. The Hennigs claimed at Nitro that Pritchard backpedaled from the point they pulled out the letter with his signature, and he claimed he knew nothing about it, but WCW was afraid as late as while Mania was going on that even though the Hennigs had assured them they weren't going, that it was pro wrestling and anything was possible. WCW put Larry Hennig on TV specifically to show Titan that they had Kurt. People in both companies noted that Kurt was extremely large, much bigger than in the past. The April 7th Raw show will only have half a crew as many of the big names including Bret Hart will be in South Africa. Sid vs. Mankind will headline. The Kuwait tour from April 9th to April 13th will feature Kuwaiti Cup 2, a similar single elimination tournament as they did last year. Shawn Michaels is now hopeful to be back in the ring in May and to possibly wrestle Bret Hart on the King of the Ring show on June 8th in Providence. Although there are rumors everywhere that Honky's mystery guy will be Brian Christopher, I don't think that's who it is. WWF to nobody's shock pulled their contract offer from Steve Williams due to his arrest. I don't expect Williams back in ECW anytime soon either. Del Wilkes has not signed a contract but essentially he is coming in. Brian Pillman is announcing on the Shotgun Show just temporarily to get his character over until he can start back in the ring sometime over the next 2 months. Jim Cornette will be managing soon again. He was replaced by Raymond Rougeau on the challenge tapes this past week because he was suffering from a bad flu and had no voice. That's probably why when he did the angle where he offered a contract to the Blackjacks and they ripped up the contract, that the entire angle was pantomimed rather than vocal. What I expect to happen is Cornette will end up managing a heel Doug Furnas and Phil LaFawn, who will feud with Blackjacks, and that mix doesn't sound like it's going to get either team over. Furnas and LaFawn at first were going to be managed by Bob Backlund, but Cornette is a lot better fit. Tiger Ali Singh debuts with the WWF on the Kuwait tour. There was a lot of internal heat on both Hunter Hearst Helmsley for his remarks regarding Sonny on the Slammies and that they were considered out of place, and on Shawn Michaels for doing the NWO clique hand signal as he came to the ring at WrestleMania. They did a television angle for Superstars where Mankind put the mandible claw on Gerald Briscoe. On the March 15th show in Landover, Maryland, Ahmed Johnson got on the mic to taunt Bob Backlund and Sultan and said something about how the fans in Louisville, the city they were in the previous night, don't like those guys. Major shows for May are May 2nd in Winnipeg, May 4th in Milwaukee, May 5th Raw in Green Bay, May 9th in Hamilton, ONT in Your House May 11th in Richmond, Virginia, Raw on May 12th in Newark, Delaware, May 16th in Albany, May 17th in Madison Square Garden, May 19th Raw in Mobile, Alabama, May 23rd at the Palace in Auburn Hills, Michigan, May 26th Raw in Evansville, Indiana, and May 30th at San Jose Arena. Although there are rumors everywhere about Disco Inferno coming in, there are no talks going on at the present regarding that. The March 24th Raw in Rockford, Illinois that drew an $81,034 house was not the biggest house ever in Rockford as reported here last week. It was actually the third biggest WWF house ever in Rockford according to WWF VP Ed Cohen, even though it was a sellout because so many seats are blocked off for a television taping. Supposedly an 8-man tag involving the Space Cadets versus Maniaco and Mosco in Hysteria and Abismo Negro that airs this weekend on Shotgun was said by People Live, taped March 25th in Peoria, to have been an outrageous match that drew no crowd reaction. The March 31st Sports Illustrated had a piece on the Jersey TV tax being overturned, largely on the admission to get wrestling deregulated that pro wrestling wasn't real. It was a poor article which we'll get into next week. The Chicago Sun-Times ran a series of articles leading up to Mania. Bret Hart is still trying to get over as a face in Canada as he's apologized in the Calgary Sun for what he is going to be doing but claims it'll come out in the end that it's all part of a master plan like Charles Bronson in Death Wish, and said his problem is only with American wrestling fans. Wrestling Observer Newsletter. P.O. Box 1228, Campbell, California 95009 1228. April 7, 1997.